Hello and welcome to Building Transformations. I'm Tom Strong, President and CEO of Building Transformations and Principal at Wired Construction. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're talking to KPMG. We're talking to Clay Gilge, who is the lead of the project advisory services for the building industry. He has extensive experience working in the industry, over 24 years. He's worked at Bechtel, he worked on the owner side at Intel. He has a tremendous amount of experience in data analytics, very intelligent guy, a lot of insight into what's happening in the industry. KPMG, if you're not aware of who they are, they're a major accounting firm, one of the largest accounting firms on planet Earth, but they also have thousands of people that work in advisory services, including people that are focused on the building industry. Really enjoyed the conversation with Clay, and let's get into it. Okay, I'm here with Clay Gilge, who is the head or lead of the project advisory for major projects for KPMG. Clay, maybe you can give us a brief introduction to yourself and who your company is and what your practice is.
Yeah, definitely. So, as you mentioned, I lead up what we call kind of our capital project side of the infrastructure and project advisory practice. And, just from the standpoint of KPMG is a global audit, tax, financial services organization. So our group sits within the advisory side of that kind of organization. And it is a global practice. We do have counterparts that are in around 25 different countries throughout the globe. Myself, I started my career as a project engineer for Bechtel, and then I'll transitioned to work for an owner. So I worked for Intel, and basically managing the procurement of large semiconductor construction, and have really spent the last 20 years of my career focused on really driving performance improvement for what I would consider kind of large scale asset intensive owners, but also construction contractors. And whether that performance improvement is really on the technology or people or governance side, or whether that performance improvement is really helping them manage risk. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, is really trying to drive kind of step change performance improvement for our clients.
Yeah, right on. So you that's really interesting background, and I'm sure that was it was really great to kind of build your knowledge of the industry, working on both sides. And you also have an extensive background in data analytics. Was that something you developed while you were at Bechtel, or is that something you got into in your new life as a consultant?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I definitely got involved with, from the consulting side. And a lot of that was really driven by, KPMG bringing on a lot of really great and talented individuals with focus around data and analytics. So what I was doing is really tapping into those individuals. Some were doing some great forensic work, forensic kind of analytics. And then some of the other ones were doing what I would consider more kind of traditional, looking at data, helping telecom and all these other industries make sense of large scale data. So I started tapping into them and saying, how can we kind of pivot that and focus on some of the challenges regarding data for large scale, kind of what I would consider capital projects and capital programs.
Yeah, right on. So, I've obviously know KPMG as a large accounting firm, but what does your kind of consulting practice look like? Like, how many people do you have working internationally that are focused on the building industry, helping companies with their digital strategy or working out a data strategy and other services that you offer?
Yeah, so I mean, within the U.S., there's around, I think, 17,000 advisory professionals, and globally, that number just kind of multiplies. In terms of who's really focused on what I would consider infrastructure, capital projects, and programs, there's a couple thousand individuals that are focused on that. Where you start getting a lot of the lines blurring, which I think is has been great, is when you get into technology and leveraging technology, whether it's from a cloud standpoint or data and analytics standpoint, because really a lot of the groups that are focused on operations, or the ones that are focused on a specific industry or a service line, such as ourselves, we're more and more interacting with the individuals on the technology side, and that group's been growing at a tremendous pace. So even within the U.S., if you said that there was maybe around 6,000-7,000 people focused on that, you'd multiply that by 2 or 3 times if you were looking at that globally. So, like I said, we are blurring a lot of the lines more and more, trying to actually approach our clients with really a cross-functional team that can help them address not just technology, but the intersection between their operations and their technology.
Yeah, right on. Well, Clay, we kind of met because I was reading this report that you published called No Turning Back, which was really looking at the influence of technology on the building industry and kind of looking at our kind of post-COVID world and what role technology is going to play in helping the us kind of work within this kind of new normal that we're all been forced into. Maybe you can summarize for us at a high level what was the motivation to create this report and what were the kind of the key findings, key takeaways that were published out of that.
Yeah, so that report, I think that was our 13th or 14th. I'll have to have to look back, but basically that report actually started around really a focus within the industry to say that we need to get better connected and really be able to help our clients within the construction industry really look, be forward looking. So it started out with individuals who were in audit, tax, advisory, wanting to reach out to construction contractors and do it in a global basis. And then what we realized over time is that you don't just have contractors. If you look across the industry, you also really have that intersection between contractors and owners. And what we're always trying to do is really, try to figure out in terms of not just looking at basic data on where they think the industry is going, but really take some of our experience that we have with our clients and say, what are some of those broader kind of trends? What are some of the things that we believe are either impacting our clients or we think could help really move the needle? So the most recent one that that you mentioned, what we were thinking about on that one is, once again, risk management is obviously an important area within a lot of our clients. That's something that we focus on for almost every single issue. So on this one, what we try to do is focus more on integrated risk management. So that was one of the topics that we were looking at. So in terms of kind of how do we look at it differently, we started thinking about integrated risk management and being able to look at risk management, not just from a project basis, but looking at it from an enterprise basis and then kind of a regional or portfolio basis, and then all the way down to the project level. And one thing that we did find out is around, I believe it's around 65% of the respondents indicated that they have the level of integrated risk management that they had was low. And one of the things too that we thought was really interesting is that while a majority of respondents believe integrated risk management was important, is a significant majority of them had difference of opinion on how do you actually make it happen and what are some of what I would consider are the key kind of prioritized areas. And when we actually took a step back and said, well, if you just look at risk management in general, they really were focused on clearly defining kind of risk culture. They were looking at the integrated risk management, but also some of the standardized kind of processes and controls. So really trying to kind of figure out from our client standpoint is how do you make sense of where they can really move the needle?
So just to interrupt there,
Sure.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by integrated risk management for our audience? Like, are you describing like shared risk, like an IPD model or an alliance contract?
So when we're talking about integrated risk management, we're not looking at it from the project level. It's going back and thinking about it from the standpoint of, let's say you had, individual projects that are taking place over what it could be a wide geography. It could be lots of different types of business units. And how do you actually have a process in place where you are consistently and from a standardized method, how are you analyzing those projects from a risk standpoint? And then how are you reporting those out up to the portfolio level and then ultimately at the enterprise level, with the idea that anyone who's in the C-suite, anyone at the board, when they look at a snapshot of risk for the overall enterprise, they have confidence that they're actually getting a pure, transparent view. And the reason behind a lot of this was really some of the recent bankruptcies where you would have a really large global engineering and construction contractor that would actually have one project that would fail, and it would actually take, it would impact the entire organization, leading to either bankruptcy or some huge financial distress. And what we wanted to do is say, there has to be a way where you can actually get that transparent view so that all the projects within a portfolio and within a region, that individuals throughout the entire, what I would consider kind of vertical chain of the individuals who are reviewing risk would have a clear picture, so that if you did it in a standardized method and you reported it in a standardized way and you had technology that provided that level of transparency, you could feel confident that your system of risk management was providing you a really clear, accurate picture, and the risk of some anomaly that for one given project was going to take your organization down would be a pretty low risk.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for these general contractors that are kind of growing organizations to kind of grow into that level of sophistication, to have the discipline, to have reporting across all projects in a consistent way, and have that funnel up quickly. Using data and analytics, so you can actually understand that cascading risk and how the whole portfolio is performing. And that was my experience as well. I mean, Bechtel is a super sophisticated company. I'm sure you had great systems in place, but in my industry experience as well, that's what I saw with general contractors, is that some projects you'd make huge profits, not really predict that you're going to make those huge projects, and some projects where you're predicting, a certain margin, you'd lose tremendously. And it was very hard to drive consistency around performance. It was almost like, having enough volume happening at the same time, it would kind of level out the bumps. But as these projects get larger and larger and the risk profile gets larger and larger, like you said, like a couple of major jobs can really sink a whole company.
Yep, for sure.
So, as it relates to all of this, do you see that, technology is playing a big role in helping to manage risk? And what are the trends that you see from your clients as it relates to taking on new technology? What do you think the opportunities are?
Yeah, I mean, technology has been a huge focus of ours, probably dating back 6 or 7 years with regards to the actual survey, dating back much further, when you actually think about how we're approaching our clients. One of the things too that we're always kind of looking at is not just in terms of what is the data telling us but also how much investment that we're actually seeing, because investment in technology is where you really start seeing, that something has become a high priority. And that's one thing too, that not just from the survey, but we're also seeing in the market is, what I would consider the appetite to spend more and more on technology. And, whether that kind of spend is on, kind of driving what I would consider kind of transformational change, or it's more kind of targeted change around certain areas. When we did the survey, one of the things too that we also found is, where do organizations believe is the greatest benefit? So if they're going to spend dollars in technology, where are they going to get the return? So when we did the survey, project reporting was the number one area where they believed that if they spent money on, there would be a definite return. Estimating and budgeting was a close second, and then performance monitoring. So as you can imagine, a lot of organizations are looking to have technology enable a much more transparent and accurate reporting and picture across their portfolios, their individual projects, so they can actually truly have that kind of clear, transparent view. And then from a pure technology standpoint, in terms of where they're spending that money from a technology standpoint, they indicated that what I would consider is PMIS, and having an integrated PMIS is one of the number one areas. Followed by BIM.
Sorry, can you define that acronym?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so when we say integrated PMAS, we're talking about project management information systems. We also kind of combine that with kind of portfolio kind of project management systems. And those are basically the systems that allow organizations to be able to track and report the performance of their capital projects. And ideally, when we say integrated, that's going to be integrated with their procurement systems, their enterprise resource planning systems, and the other systems that they have from what we consider kind of a back office or middle office standpoint that the organization is using to track and measure performance. So if it's done right from a project standpoint, if you've tied kind of some of the portfolio management and capital planning solutions with your project management information system, you can have a really clear, transparent view of the performance of individual projects and your overall portfolio at any given time. It does take a certain amount of investment, and it can be challenging, but it's an investment that can clearly pay off.
Well, across your clients, when you did these surveys, were you able to sort of benchmark the average spend on R&D or technology in these organizations? Is there like a rule of thumb, like 2% of free cash flow gets reinvested back into technology? Or what is the average, and how do you see that trending?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had that level of fidelity in terms of some of the data. A lot of times what we're asking, them is what volume of spend that they would want to have. And like you said, we could go back and probably calculate that in terms of based on, gathering information from the size and scale of their capital program. In terms of what I've just seen in terms of working with clients, and even based on some of the data, if I was going to do a calculation, it does vary quite kind of dramatically. So organizations that are going through a transformation, that are implementing PMIS or trying to do some, what I would consider some really robust, things around data and analytics, could be spending, well in excess of 2 or 3%. It's probably more like 10 or 15%. But from our standpoint, we haven't done a detailed analysis to get an idea of what is a reasonable kind of number, which I think could be a good topic for one of our next kind of surveys. It's getting a little bit more granular on that.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I guess the investment that's going into measuring performance seems significant, and I mean, personally, I would hope that this investment eventually is getting more directed at like using technology to proactively address and eliminate risk, like using BIM, for example, like investing in the tools and processes and people to proactively de-risk a project, rather than investing in technology to just measure on how you're performing, because ultimately that's not going to necessarily derive a better result. It's just going to give you a better insight into where you can improve, right? And all of these technologies are, they're dependent on software. They're dependent on third parties, typically in some form or fashion. How do you see that relationship playing out over time? Like, do you think big general contractors, owners, should perceive technology companies as potentially disrupting their business models and potentially a threat? Or do you see these companies sort of partnering up and picking dance partners that they're going to have a continuous ongoing partnership with? How do you think that relationship's playing out over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, just from the standpoint of, technology and the adoption of technology has been pretty inconsistent. It really just across the industry. And like you said, we are starting to see not just investment, but partnering and teaming, software companies kind of teaming up with, kind of contractors and other types of relationships that are really existing. But it's important to kind of understand and take a step back and understand just the entire nature of the construction industry. I do believe it is ripe for disruption from some of the big tech companies, just for the fact that large tech not only has cash, but they also have a proven, what I would consider, culture and structure that really drives overall transformation and can drive kind of step change, kind of, that's a result of big disruption. But because the construction industry is so fragmented, and what I mean by that, it's fragmented vertically, it's fragmented horizontally. So for example, if you were going to take a project, let's say you were doing an energy project in Alabama and you were building like a power plant, the vertical supply chain in terms of how, the various parties that are involved and exactly kind of how you're going to build that project in terms of all the different players and all the technology they're going to use by those players would be completely different if you were doing that project in Alabama versus if you were doing that project, let's say up in a different area, let's say Boston. And the same thing would happen if you were doing a healthcare project. Doing a healthcare project that's in Chicago, it's going to be completely different if you're building a large-scale hospital in terms of the various contractors, suppliers, A&E firms. It's going to be different than if you're going to do one in Boston. And then if you take that a step further, the same thing happens globally, whether you're doing a project in Korea or whether you're doing a project in the US. And a lot of that really helps drive where that investment in technology is going. Because if you're a contractor and you're trying to really be competitive, if an owner is not willing to spend the money on that technology, or when they're bidding out the work, they aren't valuing it at a point that's going to allow you to invest in that technology and recover, and it's going to help you win the bid, makes it really challenging to figure out who's investing in technology within the industry and to what extent they're investing that's going to have a real step change improvement. Because it's really hard if you're a small contractor to invest heavily in technology if you aren't 100% sure that you're going to get that payback.
Yeah. So when you think about the kind of current state of how we're operating, I mean, you've highlighted that it can be very regional based on the supply chain and the maturity of your partners in that region. But when you kind of think about the current state and potentially the future state of how we can be operating, what do you think is going to be really different, like drastically different 5 years from now? How do you think we're going to be operating? Is it contracts are going to be more and more collaborative? Is it new technologies? Do you see disruption on the horizon? What do you think we're going to be in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that I think are probably going to take a little bit longer that aren't going to be, I think, driving change, which is around some of the structural ways that you structure a project in terms of the parties that are involved. In terms of what's going to be different, I do think things like modular construction are going to start what I would consider really helping owners and contractors rethink, around how do you actually deliver a project, from the standpoint of supply chain and resiliency, thinking about leveraging modular construction so that you can actually streamline and you take a little bit of what I would consider variability that currently exists when you're, from the standpoint of field labor and how do you execute work in the field. I think one of the other areas that you're going to start seeing too is in terms of leveraging technology, you're going to start seeing contractors leverage technology further for just productivity and efficiency. There's a lot of technology that's out there right now that allows them from a field standpoint to get a lot more insight into the productivity and efficiency of the labor and the work that's taking place in the field. I think we're going to start seeing that more and more because, contractors and everyone's looking and figuring out how can we do these projects faster and then more efficient. And from a technology standpoint, like you mentioned, some of the stuff is just going to be high level reporting. I think the other aspect is how do you de-risk, but how do you have real time insight into the efficiency of what is taking place out in the field? And if you can solve that efficiency kind of dilemma, I think you're going to have a huge impact on overall performance.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, a lot of my clients and the companies that I interact with, their number one challenge right now is labor, just finding qualified people to do the work. I mean, we've been in a bull market for a very long time in the construction industry. Maybe that's going to change on the horizon, but we're still facing, globally housing shortages and all sorts of pressures on the industry. And we're also facing this growing dependency ratio where there's, people are in North America, at least people are getting older and older and our workforce is shrinking. So that I think that's one of the major challenges that our industry is going to have to figure out in the short term here, figuring out how to get the most efficiency out of our existing labor pool and potentially more technology that assists with making efficiencies on the job site with putting work in place, like robots that paint or whatever the case is. Are you seeing those trends as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see, a lot more, kind of focus, just like you said, in terms of leveraging technology to either help make workers who are in the field be more efficient in terms of whether it's helping them augment their work via use of drones or some other type of kind of mechanical kind of supported automation, or whether it's technology that allows them to get more intelligent around the planning, logistics, and being able to sequence and plan their work out. And one of the things too, I think from our standpoint that we're realizing is that the more organizations can actually think about technology from the standpoint of the entire life cycle of an actual project, the more they're going to get benefit out of it. So leveraging technology in the front end around BIM, but doing it in a way that's going to allow them to transition that all the way to operations are going to allow them to actually, kind of achieve a much greater kind of benefit, because the more you can leverage technology in an integrated fashion versus just these plug and play solutions, it's going to allow you to really kind of collapse some of the inefficiencies that currently exist when you're delivering projects throughout the life cycle.
Awesome. Clay, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. How can we learn more about your company and your offerings? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I mean, we obviously have a global, presence in terms of global website. We, from our standpoint too, if you're interested, we are continually to kind of publish our global construction survey. The next one's going to come out next year. Happy if people want to reach out to me directly from just a contact standpoint. I'm pretty easy to find. We either on the KPMG website or just directly on LinkedIn. So people want to hear more. You can, like I said, you can access it a couple different ways, and hopefully, more and more what you'll see is that a lot of us who are kind of trying to solve some of these problems are all, really trying to kind of collaborate and work together with our clients. So I always look at it, it's not kind of us and them, we're all working together. So happy people want to reach out to me directly.
All right. Thank you so much. And if anybody wants to find the No Turning Back report, just Google No Turning Back, an industry ready to transcend KPMG. Thank you so much, Clay, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. Building Transformations is a non-for-profit. We're focused on delivering new technologies and innovations to ultimately improve our civilization. This organization is extremely busy. We have a number of different programs that we're managing every day, and we would love to have your participation. So please go over to kbim.com or buildingtransformations.org to get involved. You can check out everything that we're doing. Of course, tune in for our next events. We have a very active and busy schedule for the next 12 months. I also want to thank all of our supporting partners, and we have many of them that make this possible. We can't do this without you, and we really do appreciate it. And I just want to encourage everyone, of course, to subscribe, like, follow, share this content. We'd love to have you subscribing on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, and that way every time we publish content, you're going to get it. So thank you very much. Building Transformations is a KPMG production hosted by me, Thomas Strong, produced by Jerry Latman, visual and graphic effects by Allison Burgess, scripting by Joseph Watson, post-production supervision by Sergey Greshko, editing by Theodore Bazaire, and visual effects and editing by Musafar Malik.